Thanks again. So my name is Sidney Armani, and I'm the moderator of this panel here and with the CrowdFund Beat. I have Joy Schoffler. Joy, we start from you. You'll introduce yourself. Everybody knows you. For the audience at home and audience here, please.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Joy Schoffler with Leveraged PR, and our firm specializes in representing companies within the securities industry, hedge funds, different crowdfunding platforms. We work with a lot of fintech-related companies, have a lot of experience within the private equity world. I used to be a private equity firm director for a commercial real estate investment firm. Lots of my staff came from banking and financial services, and we just work with a lot of issuers as well as fintech companies.
Okay, Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh Kalish. I'm a founder and the general counsel of Ingress Capital, which is a New York City-based investment platform currently operating in the Title II space, but we're exploring any channel that is a viable channel for helping our issuers raise capital. I'm a capital markets lawyer by trade. I worked at Cleary Gottlieb for 5.5 years before joining Ingress.
Zhang.
My name is Xiaocheh, and currently I work for the World Bank. And in the World Bank, that's basically I try to just include crowdfunding as an alternative finance for the development project. I'm also the co-founder for China Crowdfunding Society, and today this is my capacity for the China Crowdfunding Society, and also one apology from Jordan Meyer and my colleague from IFC who just cannot come here, although he should.
You're well represented from the World Bank.
Okay, great, and I'm happy to be here. Yeah.
John.
Yes, my name's John Berlau. I am Senior Fellow for Finance and Access to Capital at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, which is a 30-year-old free market think tank, 30-plus-year-old free market think tank in D.C., concerned with the government restricting the choices of entrepreneurs and investors and consumers. And we publish publications such as 10,000 Commandments to talk about the regulatory burden. I specialize in access, as I said, access to capital, asking, if the barrier, what are the barriers keeping the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Meg Whitman from founding the companies of tomorrow, as with Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank and other things that are hindering crowdfunding and entrepreneurs in general. And one of the other things we focus on is how do you sell and policies and make good policy good politics. So it's interesting that we're on, and was brilliant actually of Sydney to set up a politics and marketing panel, because you have to think about marketing when you're selling public policy as well as anything else.
Thanks, John. So some of the subject of the panel is the Wall Street meet Madison Avenue, and media and advertising and the regulations, basically. So after 506C, and I'm going to start with that. What do you see, Joy, after that, passing the 506C, a lot of advertisement? You're in PR agencies, so a lot of people all of a sudden putting the billboard advertisement, bringing investment. What is the rule on that?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we specialize in public relations as opposed to advertising. However, there's I think we're seeing some advertising out there, but it's people who are very aggressive for the most part. Most people are have been sitting back on the sidelines and watching, okay, what's going to happen to these people when they actually put out ads in these different papers or financial services publications. So I think people are investment firms in general are a lot more aggressive on their marketing. 5 years ago, you would never see people being so aggressive in their marketing efforts in social media, in being quoted in different publications. It was just, coming from the investment world, we were extremely conservative what we said, how aggressive we were with marketing our deals on the front side, or we couldn't even mention them. Now people are it's just loosening up the whole what people are saying while they have an open deal. They're marketing their investment firms a lot more these days, and so we're definitely seeing people loosening up, if you will, as far as their marketing efforts are concerned, being way more active on social. People didn't even go on social a lot of times within the investment space other than to just have a little bit of a presence and maybe share some news. But I think a lot of investment firms they didn't even see any purpose in it. Now we're all there for the most part. So definitely some loosening up of what is acceptable there. We are seeing some advertisements in New York Times, and I saw one the other day in The Economist, I think from Prodigy. So people are doing it. It's just not wildly adopted yet.
Joy, can they tweet about the deal flow? I mean, is it what's allowed, what's not under the?
Yeah, so if you're doing a 506c offering and you're generally soliciting, then you can go out there and share the investment offerings that you are doing. You cannot, however, hire an outside agency to go and tweet for you through that agency's handle, because then you'd be in violation of 17B. And the SEC set up a division just to monitor that. So while you can advertise, you have to be very careful when using outside partners, what they're doing, so your exemption doesn't get blown.
Okay, good. I'll get to you, but yeah, go ahead. You want to comment on that?
On that point, I mean, I think the key is that if you're using an outside agent to help promote a deal, they have to be a registered broker-dealer.
Okay.
Exactly.
So,
Oh, good.
I mean, because then that's how you lever up your ability to sell the deal, and you can really expand your sales price that way.
I should say that, to recognition of our partner, we just, CrowdFund Beat, we just become a major partner with the MarketWire International, which they're in several countries, and they're here today, and later on we're going to have them. And it shows that a lot of other advertising agencies, they paying attention to this crowdfunding. And we're going to get to that question. Tell us, what is your platform do? When you guys are started, how do you see things going?
So at Ingress, we got into this business because we saw, with the development of the Jobs Act, we saw an opportunity to help great companies tell their stories, and we think that a platform is a great place to be able to tell your story. And our focus is on consumer businesses because we think that investors can most easily connect with the story of a consumer-focused business, as opposed to a software company that's B2B, which there's a huge market for. But for the storytelling element that we're trying to inject into this process, I think that consumer businesses are ideal. And the way that our approach potentially is distinguishable from others is that we bring a high-touch, content-driven approach where we're helping companies present themselves in the best light that they can, because the truth is that even great companies don't necessarily market themselves well, and they're not great. And so what we're trying to do is help them sort of crystallize their best image of themselves, their best investor meeting, and then scale that on the web. And we do that through creating high-quality video content. If you go to Ingress Capital and you take a look at a deal page, each deal page includes sort of a cinematic short video that introduces you to the company, to the founders, and makes you connect really on an emotional level with this business. And if you do connect on an emotional level, that allows you to take that next step and dive into the numbers and decide if it's a good investment. But it's just putting a prospectus in front of an investor is a hard way to make that first connection. And that's why CEOs spend a lot of their time in one-on-one meetings with investors, and that's not necessarily the most efficient use of their time. That being said, one of the experiences that we've had so far is that you can't market investors into deals, not yet at least. It's when we're talking about accredited investors, we're talking about sophisticated people who have lots of opportunities to deploy their capital, and we've attempted, and sometimes it's helpful to market deals in using digital media or PR. Deals are still sold; they are not bought, and that's really sort of a statement about investor behavior right now. And the hope is that over time, I think the stigma, because there's a stigma around deals that are marketed on the web right now. There's a stigma that if it's being marketed, I think Brian Korn mentioned before that potentially, does that mean that this is the financing option of last resort? Like they couldn't get capital elsewhere? Maybe. But there's a stigma that is leading people to assume that that's the case. And there's also there's a stigma that now I'm trying to remember. There's a second stigma that these deals are Oh, well,
we're gonna
I
back
had
to that.
two
You gotta.
stigmas. Anyway, the point is that
Yeah,
that the marketing of deals still is stigmatized, and I think the changing of investor behavior is going to take some time. And so we were talking earlier about how 506B deals are still the lion's share of the 506 market, and that's because investors aren't interested in participating in deals that are being marketed because of that stigma. And so, we're trying to strike the right balance between providing deal flow to investors that they want, and also giving issuers access to the market.
Thank you. So again, I'm going to get to, and by the way, you just become a part of a member of the CFBA, and tell us about that. And you're part of a World Bank actually, and you do also researchers, and you research around the world. And tell us what's the involvement, of the World Bank with this crowdfunding and crowdfinance, and what your involvement is, and what you see, because you do research and analytic research for that.
Sure. Thank you. And so I do think that I have the privilege to just have multiple hats, and in the sense that being on the board of director of crowdfunding professional association, I learned I have a good community that I learn from them, and then we also share quite a lot of experience, and then of course I also got their insight, which can just bring them back to World Bank work and also in China. So then within the World Bank, we definitely have a small group, not big, a small group of crowdfunding enthusiastic or people that we try to really try to mainstream crowdfunding into World Bank Group's main business, but of course, we are a development agency, and many times you will see that in developing countries, and the crowdfunding ecosystem is not there. So then a lot of time that's we start our work always from looking at the ecosystem of crowdfunding ecosystem in developing countries, and many times, and again, that is so new in the countries, and you will find that the regulation is not there, and also the they have very poor credit history, and also credit system is not established, etc., which create quite a lot of barriers for the application of crowdfunding as a development instrument in developing countries. So in that regard, that earlier we had several different initiatives, just really try to look at different countries and learn about their ecosystem, and then to learn where are the gaps, and then where we can just develop some technical assistance and also lending instrument, then to meet that gap. Basically, our role is that helping the developing countries to just through policy dialogue and also have some technical work, then to just help them to just really just build the legal system or map out the options that they have. And also from IFC side, that IFC has quite some financial instrument which can, for example, like match funding, etc., can help the deal to just to ease the barrier of to remove the barriers of the deals. And so some application of that in China is that from the regulatory process is quite interesting process. And in China, crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding and P2P are two different animals. Mm-hmm. And we never really just use lending-based crowdfunding to categorize P2P. So when you are in China, if you talk about the crowdfunding, you are not talking about P2P. So they are two different animals. And from the regulation side, it's also very different. And when for equity-based crowdfunding is regulated by the Security Regulation Committee, and for the P2P, that is from the Banking Regulation Committee. And also, it's very the government is very enthusiastic about crowdfunding and international finance in general, and is now put in the top priority of Prime Minister agenda, and this actually create a huge demand and a huge interest from all industries. And now if you just go to China, you will see that everyone is talking about internet finance. Everyone is part of some innovation or some part of process which are requiring internet finance or part of the deal, etc. And so the government actually create quite a huge space for the sector to grow, and we from the regulatory bodies, and they are very fast comparing with the issue of other banking regulations. And for example, equity crowdfunding, we already have the first consultation. The consultation document completed in 2014 December, and there that's the accredited investor. There are quite a number of details regarding the qualification and the size, and also what can be done, what cannot be done. And then within only 6 months, as of now, that's actually then there is already a modification of the regulation being issued, and which will be there pretty soon, and to incorporate a lot of feedback from the industry as of now. And then from the that's because that was the first crowdfunding related regulation, but in that regulation it's very clearly defined that P2P is not being regulated under this. So for the P2P type, and we supposedly to have the regulation ready last June, but because of the government need more time to learn, and then they really just send people to the provincial, etc., to just get those information, and finally that's only from 2 days ago that several friends just told me that we're almost there, and then there are some details which can be shared. And
I'm going to ask you some more questions. Let me get
sure.
to John over there. I appreciate your introduction, all those information, and I have some question for you about those Chinese regulations, to looking at investing in U.S., because that's a very important, and and I know you have some report on that. John, you, by the way, well, thank you. You're one of the senior contributors to CrowdFund Beat, and you're here in Washington D.C. with Competitive Enterprise Institute, and which is their think tank here. You go, you see the politician that pushing the crowdfunding, and here's. So tell us what would you say? And you're also involved with the latest articles about the IRA trust that they're putting their money, and they're going to somehow the Labor Department to stop over there. Give us the overall view of what's happening in Washington.
Well, with what's happening in Washington, I think you have to keep in mind that good policies are like good products. And at what Josh just said about some of the deals that he participates in, that good products don't sell themselves, and good policies don't sell themselves. You have to have a marketing campaign, and you have to think about who you're marketing to. And the truth is, as with selling products, with selling ideas, there are many truths, and you can have different messages for different groups of people that you need to get your idea through that will still be true and will still achieve the result you want. Now, with that said, and going back, because we have, helped a lot of and been involved in bipartisan coalitions, and had some, success. Of course, we were part of the push for the original Jobs Act, and now we hope, the Jobs Act, whatever version of the Jobs Act 2.0. But let me start by saying 2 words that, even if true, will get the metaphorical and sometimes literal door slammed in your face with both D's and R's on Capitol Hill. Never go into the meeting and say, or never at least have this be the first thing you say, I want to tell you about a great idea I had for legislation. It's moderate and bipartisan. No, even if it's true, that gets the door slammed in your in your face, or you lose interest from the beginning because there are no moderates on the Hill, good or bad. Everyone is running. They're running for the primary more than the general election, and they want to be able to say to their party, I'm a true Republican conservative, I'm a true liberal Democrat, and something like that. So you're not really gonna, even if they are secretly moderates, you're not really gonna sell them on that point by that. You have to say, I think you have an interest in this bill, in this proposal, because it is consistent with your principles. And then tell them why it's consistent with their principles. Now, with crowdfunding, for instance, you can say to the Republicans, well, there's so much SEC red tape on small business. Now we have the technology. Let's just, there's too much government on your back. This is some modest relief. Let's get the government out of this area, and you'll get nodding heads. But you can also say, and citing Richard Schwartz's great research, that when you're knocking on the Democrats' door, it says, well, crowdfunding, and new research shows that it really helps underrepresented groups, entrepreneurs and investors with lower income, and women and minorities, and they depending on the staffer, they might say, oh, that sounds like a good idea. Now, both things are true. It is less government. It is regulatory relief. That's why we like it. And it does help underrepresented groups. So either way, you're not saying anything that's untrue. You're just giving the message to the person or the member of the group that they want to hear, or why it's attractive to them. And then, after you get in the conversation, they might say, well, let me look at the list of co-sponsors or supporters you have already. And then the Republicans say, you got some Democrats here. And then the Democrats say, you got some Republicans here. Why is that? And then all you have to say then, once you've sold them on why it's consistent with their principles, that this usually works, not always, is, well, even a broken clock is right twice a day. So it's still consistent with your principles, and then maybe bring in the bipartisan words that you could say it's bipartisan then maybe, and say, but it's the important thing is it's consistent with your principles.
No, and John, tell us what's really going on behind closed doors.
Well, what's really going on is you have to.
I mean, McHenry. I want to particularly talking about the McHenry new law that he's trying to propose in the Congress.
I've been disappointed that it's been slower than we've thought. Of course, McHenry is now vice chairman of the whole committee, of the whole House Financial Services Committee. So he has a lot of responsibilities. But don't necessarily go through if you see a member, you can make it attractive to whatever committee they're on. You never know that a lot of the impetus for the Jobs Act, and this is not widely known, actually came from Darrell Iss's, who's no longer chairman, Jason Chaffetz is chairman, House Government Reform and Oversight Committee. One of his ways of looking at oversight was what regulations are the biggest barriers to entrepreneurs, and everyone was talking about some of the, the general solicitation ban on Reg D, accredited investor offerings, other things. So a lot of the impetus came from the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, and McHenry happened to be a member of both Government Reform and Oversight and Financial Services. But that's the thing. Some of the staffers were from Government Reform and Oversight bill that drafted a lot of this. So, I mean, the story of Washington is a story of committees always wanting to assert their jurisdiction everywhere. And that's sort of, so if you can appeal to their self-interest, says, well, here's why Government Reform and Oversight, here's why Science Committee should be involved, because this helps biotechnology. And I think there's also an age demographic, and I've been finding to more liberal staffers that if you say, I want reg relief, sometimes they shake their heads, but then you say, well, shouldn't we help crowdfunding more? Haven't you done crowdfunding? And wouldn't it be great if you could, actually give the people a share in the proceeds as well as just a T-shirt? That argument still seems to resonate. Again, it's who you're talking to. And also, don't be surprised if you talk about crowdfunding and see what you could do here. Is they say, oh, do you have any advice for my Kickstarter campaign or my Indiegogo? And just even if you could give give a few words of advice if you can. That helps. I know I've heard stories like when Facebook first went on the Hill, they were saying every office, Republican and Democrat, says, "Well, what do you think? What should I do? How can I improve my Facebook page?" And so you never know, but just it's your marketing to anyone else. Know the person, what they're interested in, and things like that. So I'm still hopeful, although and it was pleased with Reg A Plus, even though it's larger than I, even though the Title III and the legislation to create the new Title III is taking longer than I liked. But one danger, which I just wrote about in Sydney Place, is the top story on CrowdFund Beat, is the Department of Labor fiduciary rule that was just introduced. Deadline for comments are July 6th, where nearly everybody who's in financial services, or a broad swath of people, including IRA custodians for self-directed investors, which you don't think of, which are not fiduciaries, may have this fiduciary label, and that could really destroy the market, the new emerging market for Reg A investments, for Reg D investments, every type of alternative investment, as well as peer-to-peer loans. The Prosper and Lending Club both, are working with IRA providers now because the government, the Department of Labor, could deem that it's not in an investor's best interest and apply new taxes to the investor, or punish and open up to lawsuit of the IRA custodians, so they won't offer these things. And I think Mark Roderick in the last panel spoke eloquently about we don't want this to be all institutional investors. Well, one of the ways you keep that from happening is to make sure that the vehicles that ordinary investors use, such as IRAs and 401ks, the chance that you can have the opportunity to invest in these products, as well as in individual brokerage accounts.
Thanks, John. Go, John. Good. Thank you for that input. Joy, I'm going to come to you. I know you're involved in this crowdfunding from day one. You're a founding member of CFRA. Tell us what CFRA does, and also I'm going to ask you a question about why marketing is so important, and what do you guys do with the CFRA, with the SEC, and what is your guys' role as a founding member? You've been in this for several years, one of the actually early people in the crowdfunding space.
I wasn't actually a founding member of CFRA, but I did join very shortly thereafter.
But you were a founding member of CFBA, where you were?
No, I think I
okay.
No,
I got my
I've
note
been on
wrong.
both boards.
Yeah. But you are one of the actually
I've sat on
early.
both boards and for years.
You should let Cindy write your resume.
No. But actually,
Yes,
she is one of the early people in the crowdfunding in the marketing, but also pushing the crowdfunding out there.
Yeah.
So
no, thank you so much.
and you write a lot of
And
articles.
Thank you for the promotion.
Okay, thanks.
So I've sat on both boards for several years within the crowdfunding industry. With CFRA particularly, we work a lot with the SEC, helping to just kind of give an industry perspective onto what's going on. So we are kind of talking about what's going on the ground, what platforms are seeing, bringing in the input from the broker-dealer community, how this is actually going to work on the ground with the platforms, how the rules will actually work on the ground, and then bringing any sort of potential concerns to them. DJ Paul, who is a co-founder of CFRA and one of the executive committee members, co-chair of CFRA, founding member, also sits on the SEC Small Business Advisory Committee, and as does Sarah Hanks, who's a member of CFRA, and there may be some other people who are also on that. Nope, just Sarah and DJ. So they're very involved in what's going on at the SEC and putting in CFRA's input as well as the input from the broader crowdfunding community. So CFPA and CFRA both have very important roles within the industry, helping to really make sure that the crowdfunding platforms have the education they need to do their jobs, as well as issuers kind of understand what's going on. I talked briefly about the 17B enforcement. There's a lot of issuers that are hiring just, your average social media or marketing person on the street, not a broker-dealer, because they're not understanding that this is a different process, and those people are getting themselves in trouble. I spoke to at some conference in Austin on a crowdfunding panel, and somebody came up to me afterwards who owned a social media company and said, I'm marketing some deals for some issuers. We've been spreading their offering all over the place. And I said, well, you really shouldn't do that. And they're like, well, we need to be aggressive because we're getting paid based upon how much money they raise. And, this is people don't understand.
That's right.
Yeah, people don't understand the difference, and especially marketers, they're not understanding the risks involved in the space. The issuers aren't understanding the risks involved. There's all this ambiguity around the term crowdfunding, and now Reg A Plus is getting, crowdfunding is getting used with Reg A Plus deals where it's completely different. I mean, there's just a lot of confusion in the marketplace, especially for general issuers. So both CIFRA as well as CFPA, the mission of these professional associations is to really help kind of clear up that confusion and educate as many people as
Along
they
with
can.
the CrowdFund Beat, we have all the
Of course,
education. We have all the
especially CrowdFund Beat.
I'm going to get to the question, but and that's what's happening. And I advise the audience at home then watching this video, and then most of the people, if you want to open a platform, get yourself a good lawyer. And I was a couple of days ago. It's a business that is all SEC. We have some of the FINRA people here today as our guests and some regulators. But what we learned in the past couple of years, that the compliance is king. You need to have the compliance. You need to make sure that you're just not advertising false. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you a question. Go back over. Then we're going to get a couple because we're running out of time. Then we're going to have audience question. What's going on with this intrastate? All those intrastate that they're doing, they have their own little country going on. What's especially in Texas and some other ones, they doing what's going on in this? Is this going to be continuous? A lot of these platforms that are setting shop in this intrastate that they are legalized. Basically there.
So what we're seeing with some of the intrastate deals is that there's not a whole lot of people using these exemptions in Texas, at least, just because you have to be a Texas registered entity, and a lot of in order to be able to execute the deal, and a lot of people are registered in Nevada or Maryland or other jurisdictions, and so not a whole lot of people are actually executing these deals on the ground. There's a couple that are in the pipeline, and they may have launched. I'm not 100% sure, but it's not. They have launched. Okay.
Yeah, CrowdFunders launched on Monday and did 6 figures in less than 12 hours.
Wow, just intrastate. Okay,
Yeah,
there we go.
interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, a
so
lot of
we,
it.
we can ask Joseph about
The
that question.
Illinois
Joseph.
House just passed a couple weeks
Illinois?
ago, bipartisan.
Okay.
It still needs to go through the Senate, but it'll probably be signed by the new Republican governor. One of the most, we're working
Good.
with the Illinois Policy Institute to liberalize crowdfunding bills there, and just it's a barrier. It would be great if the SEC were to allow, say, Delaware corporations to, as long even if their physical business is in that state, to raise it from the other.
But that's a good point. But they're subject to the corporate laws. If it's not, they're subject to the SEC laws. But all these companies, they're subject to the corporate laws, correct? If I'm right.
yes,
they cannot
that's-
run. If they have a corporation, they cannot. There's some legal issue in this.
Actually, Joseph had a good point about that.
What is it?
The lawyers know this far better than I do. I just spent the last 3 weeks with Texas. For example, in Texas, you can use a special purpose investment vehicle incorporated in Texas whose sole purpose is to invest in the operating entity, which is also based in Texas. So the source of, or the use of funds stays in Texas, but the original source company can be somewhere else. So there's no lack of companies in the pipeline in Texas that want to use it. The problem has been that the Texas board's original rules and what can actually be implemented on the ground are two different things, and they're doing a merit-based review both on every single portal and every single offering that's going up on the portals at this point. And until they kind of pick up steam and are able to standardize those rules, it's going to be really slow. But there's a couple great portals. I'd like to think they were all ours, but they're not. There's a couple great portals who are going to do a lot of business and create the market
Yeah.
very quickly.
Thanks,
It's-
Joseph. We're running out of time. Just if you want to comment on that, just a
point,
short, please.
Short comment. A friend of mine is a founder of a Texas-based portal, and one of the challenges is that they can't sell the deals, and so distribution becomes a challenge.
Okay.
You really need, and I think Mark made the point earlier, that you really need a local base that is demanding your securities, because you can't reach out to them. People aren't going to come. You can't depend on people just fishing on your site for deals.
Okay, John? Okay, go.
I think both of the states, with state legislation and with the federal government, it's very important to cultivate relationships with the think tanks and policy groups that have the ears of the legislature. And there are groups now in every state, like the Bluegrass Institute in Kentucky, and to name an example, other things, conservative and liberal, but just however many. And there are, I know on the conservative side, there's also the state policy or center right, I should say, state policy network that coordinates some of these groups. So just get to know some of the public policy groups in state and at the federal level, and
Thanks,
they
John.
then tell them the message, and then they will give their own message.
Amy, you had some question. We can take 2 questions. You had questions?
Oh, I was actually, this is directed more towards Joy.
Okay.
I was wondering whether the PR companies that specialize in crowdfunding, whether they police any of the activity if they see something questionable, and I guess, what steps do you as a PR company take where, for example, you have some portals, for example, online portals, really pushing the envelope. They might be online, but they're doing publicity leads, right?
Yeah, so we do try to, discreetly talk to people if we're seeing something that's wrong, because it's bad for the entire industry. If people are messing up, and like that social media company that I gave as an example, we absolutely, we'll pull them aside discreetly and let them know the dangers that that they potentially are facing. Things like doing webinars. Sifra just did a webinar on 17B compliance for the marketing industry, and we actually at Leverage PR donate a lot of time just to make sure that people understand. People are directed to those webinars so they can understand what's going on. From a pushing the envelope perspective, we do see that people saying stuff that will probably get them in trouble from time to time. We always advise people to be very conservative, to put a lot of thought leadership out there. As a platform, by marketing from a thought leadership perspective and marketing your platform, not necessarily the deals on your platform, you're still getting the traffic. Of course, when a deal closes, there's a lot that you can do there. Just making sure that your messaging is in line and you're not being too aggressive. So, we advise being a little bit conservative, just because you can still do all the things you need to do and reach your target audience, being a bit more conservative, and being seen as a thought leader. And really, when you're a thought leader, you're placing yourself in the education phase of the buying cycle anyway with investors. And that's going to close a heck of a lot more than saying, hey, we're giving you 18% returns.
Yeah, and if I may add, as an industry in the whole, we have a responsibility here, because in any new industry, we're going to have people that they have different intention. We have seen it also in our media. We don't publish anything that we see. We get a lot of PRs. Unless they are FINRA dealers, unless they go to a broker dealers or FINRA dealers, we don't do any of these things. So we all have a responsibility as our industry to guard this new thing. Yes, there is going to be, but mostly we see it as media is happening in the reward crowdfunding with the Kickstarters. They don't deliver not all of them, but we haven't seen so far. But we do have responsibility. Make sure they don't put something that is not there. So they have to qualify as those FINRA dealers, broker dealers, all those things. So we have that. One more question.
Two-part question. Can a platform advertise itself but not a specific deal?
Everything I've seen is, yes, the platforms can absolutely advertise themselves, and because they're not unless they're selling shares in their particular platform and they're advertising that, they're just marketing themselves as a company.
The second part is, if I'm issuer and I'm using issuer exemption for registration for my securities, can I have my own platform? Can I advertise that security as an issuer? Is there any kind of issuer exemption? I'm not acting as a platform for other deals, just my own deal.
I'm gonna default.
Say that the number one thing I would say is talk to a lawyer before
Yeah.
you do that.
That's right.
And generally no. Generally, you shouldn't be setting up a website to sell your own securities.
So if you're just marketing your
That's
Mark, you have a
if
Yeah, just as one of the many lawyers in the room who can answer that question. Yeah, if you're doing a 506c deal as an issuer, you are allowed to solicit. You can market it
Yep.
as much as you want. Now, if it gets, as all of us in this room know, it gets a little interesting if you're an issuer doing 14 deals a year. then the marketing is okay, but then you start to get into the whole broker-dealer question.
Right. And yeah, I'd just add to that, there's definitely a clarification. Like, it depends on what you're doing. Like, are you doing a 506c offering? Are you doing thought leadership out there? Are you talking about your security offering? Like, there's a lot of different variables that go into that question.
But there's also complexity, because if you're also raising money privately, and if you're doing simultaneous public raises and private raises, and you're not verifying accreditation on the private side, it gets complicated. And so, I mean, that's why working with a broker-dealer is advisable on that.
Thank you, and hopefully by this time next year we have the FINRA representative and other people as we're getting as an industry and P2P and others. So we have them, directly. I know they're watching us, or it's good to have that as an industry. But I want to, before we adjourn for the lunch, we do serve lunch, and I want to thank you to our sponsors, MarketWire. Please, could you come over here and just let us know about what MarketWire can bring to this specific advertisement? Thank you.
That's good.
Okay, take your seat.
Yeah, please.
Hey, everybody. I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, so we'll make this brief. Thanks. My name is Raleigh Wilkins. I'm Director of Sales Business Development for MarketWire. I'm joined by colleagues David Kemp and Tom Gubbins over here. So I'm real excited to be here today. A couple things that we do in this space and why we're so excited in it. So we're a Tier 1 newswire distribution company, so we submit press releases on behalf of our companies. But the other side of our company is social media distribution as well, so we integrate the two. And we work with everything from startups, which is my neck of the woods, through Fortune 500 companies as well. And one of the things we do is make sure they meet the regulatory disclosure. So a lot of things you said, I was talking to my colleagues earlier. We had a client yesterday, actually, and we were talking about how they had tried to have an agency submit their news on their behalf using their logo and acting as if they were an independent agency. And we actually had to shut them down and say, you can't issue that release. So there's a huge opportunity here right now, especially with the Tier 2 investors that we talked about earlier, doing the filings that they're doing. So doing, whether it's the 1K, I think Michael's not in the room right now, he's helped me walk through those, but sending those out. So what we do is take, especially for these startup companies, the ones that are trying to engage with an audience, they got to build brand, they're trying to build credibility, and especially from the issuer side. What we're looking at in this conference is and anyone that has input, I'd love to talk to you during lunch, is where is that best opportunity for them? Because from my perspective, a client who's invents a stand-up toothbrush that they want to sell and they want to launch a company crowdfund that is not going to really want to deal with the complexities of regulatory filings. So is it better to work with a crowdfunding platform and offer that as an all-in-one service? So we've already developed a crowdfunding news line so they can meet regulatory and securities disclosures. And one of the things we do as well is help them navigate that kind of tricky of simultaneous disclosures for social media. So I think everybody's familiar with the Twitter feed that went out earlier. It went out before the earnings release and got them into a lot of trouble. So this is tricky and risk adverse for investment. And so when you have these startup companies that are looking for funding, them navigating that can be really a challenging thing to do. So that's what we do. And then from the perspective of what we help some of you in the room do is traditionally, like, press releases are kind of looked at as a dying, archaic form of communication, but incredibly important within securities. But even more so, it takes a one-way dialogue and turns into a two-way communication. So some of the ideas already that you guys, we sat with several of you and talked through, everything that we do, you did in the 4th grade. So it was like, if you think about it, except now we have great big fancy terms like social listening, right? But if you listen to like any 4th grader, it's like, does John like me? Does he like my shirt? How important is John? Is he going to tell anybody about it? But now we do it with social media. And why that's so important is what it does is help build the validity. But here's an example, and I'll leave you this before lunch. One of our first clients when we were Sysmos, which are a co-marketed company, co-owned company, is, what she wanted to do, J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, I use this example a lot. You guys familiar with Harry Potter? So the books and all that. So when social media first starting to drive out, she wanted to know, who do I engage with in social media, which is what probably a lot of your companies are going to want to know. And so we did a quick pulse on it, and we did a search, and we found there was 2 million conversations happening about Harry Potter right now, which I think is a lot of talk about Harry Potter. Love the books. But what you want to know is she can't reach out to 2 million people. I mean, who are the most influential, right? Same thing for your investors. They may be thinking, like, there's a ton of investors, a ton of issuers. Who is the most influential? Are they credible or not? And so what we did is for her, we ran a regression analysis, and what we found out, interestingly, that 95% of those 2 million conversations are driven by 43 people. So if you could find a way to just identify one new influencer out of those 43, imagine for her it was simple. She took those 43 people, flew them first class to New York, had a red carpet premiere of a new movie, and then all of a sudden she's reached 2 million people. Now imagine the people on your platforms and what they're talking about and the speed at which influencers come up. That's where you combine the power of something that might seem as arbitrary as a press release distribution and making sure you're meeting your requirements to turning that to build credibility in issuers, to identify new investors. So there's a tremendous opportunity here for us, and so we're really glad to be a part of this. Love the panelists. Thanks for getting the introduction, and I think we get to eat now. So,
And
right.
thanks for we just announced we'll become a major partner with MarketWire CrowdFund Beat. We're
oh, yeah.
looking forward. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank
for
you.
that
I
update.
appreciate it. Yeah.